Welcome back, everybody. This is the IBN, and you can find this line drawing at artbyjennifer.store. I have her permission to use these in my paint alongs. She has a lot of great line drawings out there. She has doors, she has animals, she has cottages, and this is from her cottage collection. It's less than $10 at her website. You get 26 PDF line drawings. And I asked her for permission to use this for my YouTube channel, and she said sure. So here I'm just wetting the sky and putting in some different colors. I know everybody likes to put bright blue in. I just throw blue and alizarin crimson and some yellow together to make an interesting sky. Everybody does blue. I'm different. And this is just some yellow gold thrown in on the roof. I want it to stand out. If you look at any of the other cottage drawings that I've painted in, I usually don't go with the traditional black and gray shingle roof. These are all in Europe, so I'm going to pretend they're straw or whatever. Slate, straw, who knows. You can make it whatever you want. You can make it gray if you want. I'm going with yellow. And I'm just putting in some shadow color here, which is just some cerulean blue with a little bit of Payne's gray, just a touch of it in there, just to darken the blue a little bit. Throwing in some shadow colors right now. Shadow on the fence. Throw some grass in there. This is just yellow gold, I believe it's called, and I'm going to throw some cerulean blue in there to make it green a little bit. Add some texture, some ridges to the front lawn. Now I'm going to go in with some really dark Payne's gray to go around the dormers of the roof. And in watercolor, if you're not familiar, you can always go over it again and again and again to darken it up. You don't have to make it as dark as possible the first time. Just remember to let your layers dry in between. If you've watched my channel at all, you'll know I mainly mess with oils. I just got on a watercolor kick the past 9 months. So I'm an amateur. I'm by no means a professional watercolorist, so you're learning with me. You will see me make mistakes on this. If you're a professional watercolorist, I hope you can forgive me. But if you're brand new to this, I just have a cheap watercolor set. That's why I don't show you my palette, because I'm not a professional that does all kinds of elaborate mixes. I grab the green, I'll grab several colors of green, and here I did a light green, and then I'm doing dark on top. If you're new to watercolor like me, you know at this point that you work from light to dark, whereas in oil you would work from dark to light. And what I'm doing in this painting is what people would call a line and wash, except I do my ink line at the very ending. I treat it like a highlight. I think it adds all the 3D depth at the end, so it's kind of fun to do it that way. But most watercolorists that are professional will always start out with the ink first and then fill in all the paint. I do it the opposite. And I'm just putting more shadow colors in here on the chimney and the base coat of the bushes and the trees. My sky is now dry, so I can go in and do these trees behind the house. It's not going to bleed into my sky. That's the best way to work on watercolor, in my opinion, is work on a dry field that's not adjacent to a wet field. That way you won't get the bleed over. And now I'm going back to my I don't know, those are azaleas or something that are growing there. I'm going to put a darker, deeper coat of red in there to emphasize the flowers. And as I said earlier, I start out with the lights. Now I'm going into the bushes with darker green and the ivy bush that's growing around the front door. Everything is very bright and pastel looking in this part. You have to let things dry and keep going back in and back in. This probably has 8 or 9 layers in this painting. If you're not a patient person, you definitely will learn it when you're learning watercolor. Paint comes in later. I'm going to distinguish the climbing vine and the branches a little better. I'll define the rock wall and the lining of the garden with rocks better. And now I'm doing some real fine line work with the smallest hairbrush I have. And to talk about paint brushes, I like to use Rosemary and Company. They're from England. This is not sponsored. I pay for my brushes, but I do not deal with the craft store brushes. They lose hairs and the ferrule come completely off the stick after 1 or 2 uses. I get so tired of those junk brushes. So if you want a high quality paintbrush in watercolor, I spend my money on paper and the paintbrushes because I think you can pretty much do a lot of magic with a cheap watercolor set. But if your paper is no good and your brushes are no good, you're going to really struggle. So Rosemary and Company is in England, but I've never waited more than I think 10 business days for an order of my paintbrushes. And you can buy so many for acrylic, watercolor, or oil. It's an amazing selection, and I've never had a bad one, and I've never had to send one back. And she doesn't sponsor me for saying this. I just will tell you what I think is good. Just doing the emphasis on the shadow, just the first round of shadow underneath the overhang of the roof. And that's another thing I do in watercolor. I spin my paper all around the place. A lot of artists, you'll see, they tape it to a board and they leave it. I gave up on tape. I have tried all kinds of tape brands, everything that everybody recommends on YouTube tutorials and Facebook watercolor groups. They say use this kind of tape, use Blue Painter's tape, use Frog tape, use Paul Rubens tape. I've never had a tape that works and doesn't make my paper curl. So what I do is I just spin it around, make the painting as accessible as possible to my hands and wrists, and then when it's dry, it's slightly curled, but I'll just go ahead and stick it in a giant 1960s encyclopedia that I inherited from my father, and after about 2 weeks, that paper is as flat as it was when it came off the tab. So if you want to tape your paper down, you go right ahead, but I like to be able to spin my paper around so I can have easy access. And this is just more Payne's Gray. I use Payne's Gray all the time for everything. And I'm just darkening the door. And I'm leaving an area there so you can see the difference between the shadow and the non-shadowed part. And there's an angle on the fence I'm filling in. This is probably the second layer of shadow color on this fence. I think I do 4. And there are slats and individual boards in that fence, but I don't emphasize those till the very end. And I'm going with the shadow color. This is a deep blue with a little bit of purple for the shadow of the stone wall. And I'm going to go underneath this flower bed here, darken up all the rocks. Somebody lined off this flower bed with a bunch of rocks and stones. Adding more shadow color on the house from all the plants and the dormer, porch roof, and all that. The red berries and flowers, whatever that is, on the little tree hanging over the fence. And then put some more deeper red in the azalea bush. Want some intense color in the beginning in the front here. I've recently written 4 children's books. 2 of them are available on Amazon. I'll put a link down below. I think children's book illustration is fascinating, and these cottages remind me of books that I grew up reading. So if you're interested in illustrating children's books, I think this is a really fantastic way to get started. Do a line and wash, because like I said, if you go to artbyjennifer.store, she's got animals, she's got front doors, she's got cottages of all kinds, lighthouses. If you're into writing children's books or anything like that, I think this is a good way to get started, in my opinion, because you could build a whole story around this little cottage. And if you illustrate it yourself, that's even more accolades to your name. This doesn't appear in my children's book, but it gives me some ideas. And I'm just re-wetting the roof that we did before here, because I'm just going to go in. I'm going to load my paintbrush up. I want to emphasize this thatch roof, I guess we'll call it. I'm going to darken it up, give it some texture. And the nice thing about watercolor is the paint is not going to travel where the paper is not wet. So you don't have to worry about this brown leaking into the front facade of the house. Watercolor is about control, and you either have it or you don't. And you've seen me use my paper towel to fix a couple of errors in the previous videos. It's all a learning experience, and the more you paint, the better you'll get. So that's why I started this YouTube channel. Hopefully in a year you'll see that I've improved greatly. And if you're a professional watercolorist and you see me making errors that you think you need to point out, by all means drop a comment. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm learning. I am by no means professional, but I encourage you to get out some paintbrushes and some paper and just try it yourself. You'll lose track of time, and if you got a lot of stress in your life, you will forget about it, at least while you're painting. And it doesn't have to be a super expensive hobby. I know people that spend thousands and thousands of dollars on their woodworking equipment and their painting equipment, and it doesn't really have to be that way. I started out with cheap craft store brushes, and 9 months later I decided to make some investments in things, the paper and the brushes. I'm still on my original first paint set too. Watercolor paint lasts a long time. And going back here into the door window, just putting some individual blades of leaves and grass, and darkening a little bit of that fence line there in front of the window. And now it kind of looks like it's blending with the old shadow, so I know I'm going to go back in here. Here we go, with more shadow color to make a distinguishing shadow line there. And the lawn looks really boring right now. It's barely green. It's very flat. We're going to add texture and some ruts and some blades of grass to that later on. But as you can see, they're starting to get some depth in this painting. The real magic, I think, happens at the end when we get the pen out. But right now, I'm just hitting little bitty individual flower petals and shadow color. And here I'm going to go in with a dry brush technique, which is basically not pre-wetting. I did not pre-wet the lawn this time. I'm going in sideways, the side of the brush mostly, and letting it streak out, putting a little bit of a shadow on the lawn there, just to give it some depth. It's not so flat. And later on, I'll cover the cottage with a paper towel, and I will get super wet mix, brown, green, sometimes just a dirty mix, and I will flick it onto the lawn to make it look like acorns and sticks and pebbles and whatnot, just to give it some life in the foreground. I want your eye, of course, to be drawn to the plant around the door, but there's nothing wrong with making the foreground less boring. And emphasizing more little berries there underneath the hanging flower pot. I'm putting some pretty intense reds in there. You put whatever colors you want in there. Now I'm adding some purple. Dioxazine purple is really dark and really intense. I'm going to let it soak in and fade out a little bit. Putting some more shadow color to give some depth to the ivy that's coming out from the wall a little bit. And I talked about this earlier. I'm going back in with Payne's Gray to re-emphasize the darkness of the dormers. And when it's wet, it looks really extreme, but it really won't be when it soaks into the paper and dries up. I'm going to go over that fence again. This is Payne's Gray. And notice what I did there. I did that whole fence with one load of pigment in the brush. If you keep going back to it over and over again, you'll get some watermarks. You try to load your brush full and then go to the subject that you're painting. If you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, you'll end up with a mess. And I'm just doing a kind of a clean water mop on the white plaster of the front of the house. And I'm going in with an extremely light layer of blue. The house is white, but I'm thinning it out here because I don't want stark white watercolor paper as the house. And more dioxazine purple with a little bit of Payne's Gray to make that stone wall, because that's what that is. You can't tell right now, but it's a stone wall, stonework and rock work in front of the flower bed. I'm going in really dark. It'll dry lighter. And now I'm going around the porch roof with some brown. Oh, it disappeared. I don't know why that happened. Editing. And just emphasizing my windowsills. This is the second or third time I'm going around them again. As you can see, I really like to spin my paper. Putting some shadow color on the square part of the chimney and the clay pot part of the top of the chimney. Stick around to the end. You'll see the depth pop when I get the ink in. Right now you may think it looks really flat, except in a couple of areas, but it will change here. And the white part of the windows, I'm now going in with some blue, so they're not stark white. They're not the watercolor paper anymore. And here's where I was talking about covering the cottage to protect it because some of it's still wet. And I'm just going to get a dirty mix of brown and greens and grays and start whacking my paintbrush on another paintbrush all over the ground. So put some spots in there, which could be clumps of grass, etc. And now here's what I consider the fun part, the ink part of the ink and wash. You'll find a lot of people on ink and wash will do it the opposite of me. They'll start out with the ink, but I like to finish with the ink. If you watch my other 4 cottage paintings, I do it the exact same way. I just think it's fun, and this is sped up in 2 times. I really am not doing the ink this fast. But I also like to do it kind of sloppy. I am not being precise. I only use a ruler here on the shingles, and I let my pen skip on the shingles. But right now I'm freehanding this because I think it looks more illustrative. If I got a ruler out and did all these lines with a ruler, it would look very computerized and digitized, and I don't want it to. My hand shakes a little, but it's good enough for this. And I purposely am going just kind of quickly because I want it to look more artsy than computer generated. We have enough computer art in the world, in my opinion. This has a human touch. And it's a lot of fun. I'm drawing the curtain lines in there, the folds of the curtain, I mean. Emphasizing the roof, darken it up with a pen. I could do it with a paintbrush, but I'm not. Now I'm drawing the little points of the actual fence posts here, and now I'm going to draw them all freehand. I could use a ruler here, but I'm not going to. I'm letting my pen skip, as you can see. I'm not going to draw every single line of every single board. And then I'm going around the stonework here. You'll see at the final picture, it's kind of cut off in this view. But those are stones. And then the door is made up of a bunch of individual boards, and I'm drawing the lines for that. I'll draw in the frame and emphasize the porch step. There's 2 little kittens sitting on the front porch. We'll emphasize them later. I'm drawing some squiggly lines to show the depth of the bush and the azalea bush. Give it some character there, some blades of grass, emphasizing the stonework in front of the flower beds. Just kind of jumping around, having lots of fun. The side of the house here, and the roof point, and the chimney. One of the chimneys. Now here's where I get my ruler out. And I'm letting my pen skip. I'm not going to draw solid lines across the way because it's an old roof. It's curling some. I like to do my roofs this way. If you watch my other 4 cottage paintings, you'll see maybe I need to change things up, but I think this looks good. And if you're worried about your ink pen running, just make sure your paper is dry. But I've tested this. I can draw with the Sharpie fine point marker on the watercolor paper, and as soon as the ink dries, I can go in with a wet mop brush, and it doesn't smear the ink any. But I just don't like doing it that way. I feel like it's less of a coloring book when I do it this way. And I can fix some mess ups from my painting too. Yeah, I can make the line thicker to cover up where I've slopped some paint outside of an area, the roof or whatever. And sometimes my ruler's a little crooked, but I'm letting that ink pen just skip and hop all over the roof. I am not pushing down the entire time. And at the end, in the final photo, you'll be able to see that. And And now I'm in an angle where I'm putting the vertical lines in, the hatch marks for the individual panels of shingles, whatever this roof's made of. I'm not doing each one just like if you were painting a brick wall. You wouldn't put every single grout line in. That would make it look fake and cheesy, I think. Just doing some slash marks here and there makes the roof look more realistic. Going underneath my window and the dormers. And I'm drawing individual branches and sticks in the ivy that is around the porch roof. And as you can see, it's adding a lot of depth when I do this. My lines are darker in the foreground with the marker than they are, say, in the trees behind the house. And that's how things should be. If you're confused on not having depth in your painting, the further away something is, the more muted the color should be, and the closer it is, the more intense the color should be. So if you have muted colors in the foreground and really intense colors in the background, you need to switch that, and that will provide some depth for you. Just drawing more branches here. Individual leaves I'm drawing out and scratching some blades of grass into the lawn. I'm outlining that shadow of the lawn, outlining the two kittens sitting on the porch. They don't look like kittens, but they're sitting there. Drawing some stems, and it's a black ink, but it doesn't matter. Drawing the actual hanging basket. And going over that roof overhang with more black ink to give it the depth. Now the shadow was lacking over there, so I went back in with the same color, darkened it up because that chimney is casting a shadow. And going over the white plaster with a little bit more light blue so it's not so stark white. And I'm darkening the curtains here again. And the fourth time, final time, putting more shadow on that wooden fence there. And the wall. Now my dormers need to cast a shadow, so I'm going to go in there next. And the lawn is going to get one more treatment of splatters. And that's just more brown paint. And I'm going to do my last tree. Emphasize the different clumps of leaves. Just random drawing on it. And that's that, folks. I hope you enjoyed watching this. I certainly enjoyed painting it. I hope you enjoy it, and you'll check out my other paintings and go to artbyjennifer.store. She has some great stuff that's very affordable. And please consider sharing and subscribing. And if you have a comment, I'd be happy to read it. And check back for more paintings. I work in acrylic, oil, as well as watercolor. Thank you so much for watching.